Welcome to this lesson on economic geography, which is standard SSWG6. As you can see, the standard is that you will be able to examine the spatial distribution of major economic systems and analyze the role geography plays in economic development. There are 5 strands in the standard. Overly simplified, they are: compare the levels of economic development, explain the relationship between levels of economic development and economic activity, describe the factors that influence the location of economic activities, describe the causes and effects of the trend towards urbanization, and analyze the impact of trade. Today, we're going to focus on the first of those threads. So before we begin, I want to look at the key terms in this standard. We're not going to get into all of them today, but it's good to know what they are. First, gross domestic product, or GDP. This is the sum of all goods and services produced within a country within a year. So think everything from paper to cars to houses to haircuts to oil changes, anything you can think of. We're also going to talk about GDP per capita, which is what you get when you divide a country's GDP by the population of the country. It's an average. This is important because it helps you understand the standard of living in a country. Countries like Qatar and Monaco are much smaller than the US, but they actually have higher GDP per capitas due to the economic activities in those countries. Literacy rate. The literacy rate is the number of people in a country over the age of 14 who can read and write. Life expectancy. How long can we expect someone to live based on where they were born? Gender. And more specifically, what is the role of gender in a society? Are genders treated equally? Access to health care. Are people able to get the care they need when they get sick? And we will discuss the United Nations Sustainable Goals for 2030. These are goals to help ensure that people, regardless of country, have an equal opportunity to thrive in the 21st century economy. So let's look at life expectancy. This map is the life expectancy for every country from last year. Look at the key. Do you see the blues and purples? What do you notice about these countries? What do you notice about the countries that are in the pale yellow in comparison? Think about your understanding of these parts of the world. Now, let's look at what happened and how economic development has helped change the statistic over time. Back before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in a state of poverty. Even here in America, most people survived on agriculture and frequently just what they needed for themselves. The Industrial Revolution was a time of great expansion of machinery and other techniques that allowed fewer people to meet the needs of everyone. People were able to actually go outside of the home to work and come up with things that people wanted and needed. Knowledge of healthcare was also very limited. People knew very little of how the body worked. People didn't even know that germs were the cause of disease. And archaic medical treatments were sometimes worse than the conditions that were being treated. But as we moved into the 20th century, we began to see an increase in the life expectancy of industrialized countries. But in other places in the world, that just wasn't the case. That being said, look at the maps on the next few slides, and you'll see across the globe that all countries are better off now than they were 200 years ago. Here in 1800, the entire world had a life expectancy of less than 40 years old. That's not to say people didn't live to be older. Benjamin Franklin was 84 when he died in 1790. But these are just averages. As you can tell, those averages were rather bleak. But as you fast forward a century and a half, you can see a big difference. More industrialized countries have life expectancies into the late 60s or even the early 70s. Medical technology had greatly improved. By this time, we had vaccines and antibiotics, which have helped extend the quality of life for so many people. But look at Africa. As you can see, that wasn't the case for the whole world. Fast forward another 65 years, and we begin to see even higher qualities of life. Life expectancies in highly industrialized countries is now in the late 70s to early 80s. Even Africa has seen a huge boost to life expectancies. Look at North Africa. Life expectancies are nearly as high as the United States. And even sub-Saharan Africa has seen increased life expectancies by 20 years or more. You see a similar trend with literacy rates. Look at this map and notice how countries we tend to think of as more industrialized have higher portion of their citizens that can read and write. When you compare the literacy rate map with the GDP per capita map from 2016, you see there are a lot of similarities. It's not perfect, but there are some noticeable overlaps. When you look at this chart, notice how over the past 200 years, the rates of worldwide illiteracy, as indicated in the pink, have fallen, especially since 1950. Changing gears some. In 2013, the United Nations General Assembly set up a group to develop the Sustainable Development Goals. A few years later, in 2015, 17 goals were adopted for where we should be as a civilization by 2030. You can see those goals on the slide, and I'll come back to them in a bit. To quote the UN, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with the strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. The 17 goals are very lofty. We begin with no poverty and zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. In the end, these are very lofty goals. The question is, will we get there as a global community by 2030? Why do we even need to try? What happens if we don't get there? That gives us a good summary of the standard. I hope that gives you a better understanding of how economics and geography are related. Again, it's not a full lesson, but again, it is a good place to start. Thank you.